Families all over Gaza are struggling to pick up the pieces of the shattered lives and are finding little room to mourn the dead, with no end in sight for the end of the Israeli bombardment. Tariq Abazoum, Al Jazeera, Rafah, in southern Gaza.
All right, so that's where it's at right now. They've been planning on going into Rafah. They're going to do more, but you see, they've already done a lot. They've gotten a lot accomplished in the place where they told everyone to move and it would be safe. And there's 2 million refugees living in tents, just trying to live through the day. And they got a big military excursion going down there, expedition. That they're going to show off their military might and power, and we're going to look into some of the keys behind the belief systems that make them such brave soldiers as we go through tonight's episode. What did you think about those clips, Tony?
Fascinating, devastating, tragic, but also interesting from the standpoint of history. The Oslo Accords, or first Oslo Accord, what, 93? That's an interesting history because, what the Palestinian Liberation Organization under Arafat was trying to accomplish, yet, they were still keeping alive the idea by recognizing, unlike the sort of nascent Arab leadership during 1947, that Israel were going to say they're a state, if I remember correctly, or were willing to say they're a state under certain conditions as well. So there was major steps forward in outlining this two-state solution that was on the table in 1947, and that was unfortunately dismissed by the Israeli aggression by forcing all of these native Arabs into Palestine.
48 was also turned down by the Arabs because basically somebody came into your town, they claimed all of it was theirs, and then the solution was, let's just give half the town to them.
Right.
And
that's exactly right.
But when you follow that all the way up through to like 2000,
but the problem is by not doing that, though, let's just say this created the conditions now for the genocide we're witnessing. There might have been more recourse to international bodies if a two-state solution was agreed upon earlier. I'm not saying it was ever right. We all know historically it was wrong from the get-go, but the tragedy of not playing politics back then has precipitated into a greater tragedy of what we're experiencing today. And also, because they didn't have any foundation of the two-state setup back then, when they tried to reinitiate that in the 1990s, that gave the neocon, like the Likud-style parties that exist within Israel, the impetus to make sure that, okay, we got to nip this in the bud right now. And they certainly did. They supported the most radical elements within Palestine, maybe even planting individuals from other nations, who knows what they did, in order to build up a straw man called Hamas in order to justify caloric all these genocidal policies that have been going on now since 2007, really.
Useful proxies to drive your agenda, almost like they need those proxies to drive their agenda, like it's a type of fuel. Right. And you might hear 2 or 3 other pieces of evidence tonight that make you think, oh geez, that might actually be going on. I hadn't considered it like that, but it could be in that nature. Now, when you get to like 2005, right, there used to be this thing called the Palestinian Liberation Organization run by Yasser Arafat. He was an interesting character, and I'm not a fan of his.
Yeah, he was a lot of problems with that organization, no doubt.
He was a thorn in Israel's side as far as like he's definitely going to have a two-state solution.
Right.
He was going to negotiate. There's going to be a two-state solution, and they were going to have a military and self-defense capabilities when they were done.
That's right.
All of a sudden, he dies. He died suddenly before it was so popular. And in trying to explain this to somebody today, I had to go, here's the evidence. And there it is. It's on Reuters. Now, you won't find it published anymore because for some reason last year, around October, they stopped like archiving this page. And so thankfully, archive.org has you can read all about it. There was an autopsy. Here's what his wife had to say, these sort of things. So when people say there's nothing to that, I say Reuters, and why did they censor it? Why don't they want us reading it? Maybe we should read a little bit of this into the record. This is by Paul Taylor in Paris, and the date is November 6th, 2013. Palestinian leader Arafat was murdered with polonium, says his widow. They left her alive. Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat was poisoned to death in 2004 with radioactive polonium. His widow Suha said on Wednesday after receiving the results of Swiss forensic tests on her husband's corpse. Quote, "We are revealing a real crime, a real political assassination," she told Reuters in Paris. A team of experts, including from Lausanne University Hospital's Institute of Radiation Physics, opened Arafat's grave in the West Bank city of Ramallah last November and took samples from his body to seek evidence of alleged poisoning. "This has confirmed all our doubts," said Suha Arafat, after the Swiss forensic team handed over its report to her lawyers and Palestinian officials in Geneva on Tuesday. Quote, "It is scientifically proved that he didn't die a natural death, and we have specific proof that this man was killed," end quote. She did not accuse any country or person and acknowledged that the historic leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization had many enemies, although she noted that Israel had branded him an obstacle to peace.
Peace
She
for them
told,
means the complete control of the Gaza
"Can't have
Strip
him
and the
around
West
anymore."
Bank. Yeah, that's
And
what
who
peace
else has
means to
gotten
them.
polonium in the past 10 years? This is an interesting little trail of who uses polonium for assassinations. She told Reuters the polonium must have been administered by someone, quote, "in his close circle," because the experts had told her the poison would have been put in his coffee, tea, or water. It's interesting. It's almost like the plot from 9 to 5 with Dolly Parton back in the day. I'm so angry what happened. I'm sorry. I'm so angry at what happened, and I feel I'm mourning him all over again. This was an act by cowards, end quote. Arafat signed the 1993 Oslo Interim Peace Accords with Israel and led a subsequent uprising after the failure of talks in 2000 on a comprehensive agreement. Allegations of foul play surfaced immediately. It's funny they didn't do an autopsy till like 10 years later when it was safe, or doesn't matter what the results are, right? They already have Hamas in place. Like, Hamas comes into government because they whacked Arafat, is
Yeah,
my
that's
point.
literally correct. Yeah, and that's admitted by Benjamin Netanyahu himself in like 2006 or whatever.
Yeah, they wanted to get rid of this guy, and he happens to die of polonium poisoning.
Right.
Continuing, Arafat.
And then they built the straw man as the Arabs being the bad guys. That's through that the whole time. Exactly right.
This is how Reuters is allowed to print it. Arafat had foes among his own people, but many Palestinians pointed the finger at Israel, which had besieged him in his Ramallah headquarters for the final 2.5 years of his life. So they're trying to kill him for 2.5 years, but they had nothing to do with his death, everybody. Quote, "President Arafat passed away as a victim of an organized terrorist assassination perpetrated by a state, that is, Israel, which was looking to get rid of him," end quote. Wassel Abu Youssef, member of the Executive Committee of the Palestine Liberation Organization, said in a statement on Wednesday, quote, "The publishing of the results by the Swiss Institute confirms his poisoning by polonium, and that means that Israel carried it out," end quote. The Israeli government has denied any role in his death, noting that he was 75 years old and he had a really unhealthy lifestyle. You know, he's a terrorist, Tony. There's a lot of risk to that. You could get
Maybe he smoked too
assassinated with
many
polonium.
cigarettes or something.
Quote,
somehow, I don't think a cigarette
here's
smoke
their
though is
best.
going to
Here's
have
their
radioactive
best.
polonium,
So they're like,
half-life associated with it.
They're gonna seal the deal right here with the propaganda meister. Quote, "This is more of a soap opera than science. It is the latest episode in the soap in which Suha opposes Arafat's successors," end quote. Israeli Foreign Ministry spokesman Yigal Palmor said. It's very creative. It's very creative. He must watch a lot of soap operas over there. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's his
Smoking
metaphor.
gun. Yeah, right.
So this goes on, and you can read it because thank you, archive.org for preserving what Reuters can't afford to preserve. And I'm not going to go into the pedantic mentioning of, Rothschild.org's timeline reflecting their relationship with Reuters starting back in like the 1840s and 1850s, because, we do that all the time. And I feel like that's just so boring to go to their Rothschild timeline and to look at the things that they actually claim went on back in the day. So we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. This is not the type of show that does things like that. But I did have a couple other tweets we should look at before we go to the next media block, because things like this were going on. They're collecting little kids' toys and putting them on their trucks. I called it collecting trophies from their victims because There seems to be a lot of that going on. A lot of friendly fire. What was the other one I wanted to show you? Oh, okay. So this is good. This is the propaganda meister, Elon Levy, right?
Correct.
He's got
Oh yeah,
real
we covered
good
him a
English
lot
speaking.
over the past
So
couple
he's
of
like
weeks. Indeed.
UNRWA is trolling itself hard, right? Because he paints UNRWA as terrorists, right?
Of course.
Tone deaf propaganda meister says what? What? You just say, dude. First off, you claim United Nations recognizes Israel's right to exist, and then you claim the United Nations are terrorists, and you can't. That's your excuse for starving people. Like that doesn't even make any sense, bro. And you're out there like you're tweeting that stuff like that, and yeah, I mean, so
while saying that the United Nations and their various sort of subsidiaries that have been reporting on human rights associated in the Gaza Strip are all, completely incorrect and Arab Islamic propaganda sort of thing, which is complete nonsense. But they like to spread a lot of different let's call them narratives. We'll call them narratives.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of narratives being crushed right now out there because there are no innocent civilians, Tony. And we're going to learn about it all night that there are no innocent civilians because this is
What do they do? Change the definition of innocence?
I mean,
or civilian? I mean, gee, I've heard they want to change the definition for crime.
Well,
I've been hearing that a lot in America lately, but
technically what goes on in Israel is a civil war because all this goes on within the confines of their own boundaries, right?
correct.
So when they're calling in airstrikes so proudly, it's like, dude, you're so proud of having a civil war in your country right now. Come on. You can do better than that.
I don't even think they see it as a civil war because usually a civil war, these people are already recognized as citizens, and there was some sort of disagreement or separation of the two. They were never separated, right? Yeah, this is not a civil war as much as it's just a genocide. It's really just as simple as that.
They claim self-defense the whole time while denying the opponent in the game self-defense.
Correct.
Right? They're like, genocide. Oh, those guys use hospitals. It's like, did you give them another place that they can officially set up their military offices, or did you make them hide among the population so you could do this to them? And every time they're like 1,200 dead on 10/7, that's a tragedy. And I don't like the military strategy that was conducted that day. However, most of the targets were military targets. The civilians got in the way, and the people that planned that civilian concert right next to the concentration camp of prisoners, they knew about Operation Jericho Wall. Hamas did not. And for IDF to have so much friendly fire from the tanks and the helicopters and not take the blame, like, hey, half of the people killed were probably friendly fire and Hamas got half and some civilians got away. And I'm not excusing what happened that day. I think it's atrocious. I think it's atrocious that they filmed it. I think it's atrocious. And it also is so atrocious, it doesn't need to be hyperbolized as it was this past week by claiming 400 women were shot in the genitals and their breasts were all passed around like footballs. We will play the clip because that's not my claim, but it's a repetition of Hasbara that made it through all the way through Congressman Ogle's official press releases.
I've seen the footage of
You've seen footage of
shredded children's bodies. That's my taxpayer dollars. We're going to bomb those kids.
So I think we should kill them all, if that makes you feel better. Everybody,
This is a problem, and that type of stuff creates real hate and anti-Semitism, and none of us want anything to do with that. Like, I don't wish other people getting hurt because of them saying things that aren't true. I'd like to cut this off here with the little facts and truth and evidence and articles and experience and step back from all that craziness of people just blindly hating each other and not even hearing and integrating and comprehending what the other side is saying. Like, if we can't understand what makes war in the first place, we're never going to get the peace. And part of what makes war is all this Hasbara and hyperbole and all these other things that make the other side say, look at these people, they're just lying all the time. There's no reason to lie when there was legit things that happened on 10/7 that could be pointed out and used as a justification to deal with Hamas. But nothing that happened on 10/7 is a justification for what you've been doing to the 2 million people that are civilians, and you don't give them a chance to identify as military or not. And that's convenient to your agenda, that you can just say there are no innocent civilians and everyone's Hamas over there. But that's not how it is in reality.
Yeah, it harkens back to what Norman Finkelstein said the first week after the tragic events of October 7th. Pasta on Jimmy's show, had Norman Finkelstein on, and I thought it was very important we play it because, again, we're hearing the same themes repeating themselves. What were the conditions before October 7th? Were the people desperate? Were they angry? Were they frustrated? Did they feel as though the situation was desperate and hopeless? Was there extreme forms of despair? Oh, wait, there were, that's that pinch point Al Jazeera article we just played. Oh, so that's corroborated even by Gallup polls? Holy shit. That's tragic and frustrating and disconcerting to say the least. And it just reinforces what Norman Finkelstein said. He concluded, having done scholarly research on that for 40 years in publications, it's hopeless. That the Israeli in that situation, the way the Israeli or the Zionist party and the Likud party in particular and the Zionist government played it was, it's created the situation of absolute despair and hopelessness, and that is now echoed in the population there that sees themselves up against both a metaphorical and literal wall. And there's no recourse. That South Africa used an international body to try to bring awareness to this. But unless someone of equal strength is going to stand up to the U.S. and U.K., no one's going to do anything. And this tragedy, that unfortunately, I agree, and sadly and tragically agree with Norman that it's going to end when one side pretty much annihilates or forces the other side out. I don't see a solution unless someone stands up to the U.S. and the U.K. and their allies and finally say we're not going to support the Zionists in any formal way. But at this point, the rapidity, the haste, the speed at which this is taking place, by the time there's any recourse to something like that, it may be too late. So I hope that's not the case, but this is the tragedy that's unfolding us, and it's important to document it for that reason, especially with how fast this is all happening.
Because this past week, we had the United Nations take a vote, and you got all these memes with the bloody hands coming out of the people who abstained and the people who voted against it, the veto against it, the sole only veto against it was the United States. And I pity the fool who had to sit in that seat and raise their hand. I'm sorry you had to do that, but that is your job, and you sold out a long time ago, most likely to get that job, and that's what you got to do, and that's how it is. So I don't feel bad for you, but now you're internet meme famous, unfortunately, not in a good way. It's kind of like internet meme notorious. Notorious. It's not a BIG thing. I think it's a Duran Duran thing. That's where they sampled it from, but it was a Duran Duran thing back in the 80s. All right, so in this set of clips, we have the United States ambassador calling for a final solution. Not my words, but it's not a very good phrasing, and they're kind of tone deaf. Although there's a lot of tone deafness going on. It's like a tone deaf orchestra.
For a crystal knock to catalyze this whole thing.
We'll wait for Crystal Ball
to
Palantir in on that with her screening glass to be able to foresee the future. All right, so it's Katie Halper, it's Lee Camp, it's Andy Ogles, Ogles. You got to follow this guy on Twitter. He's a congressman. He's going to be great. And there's two clips, so you get to see a couple different dimensions of these stories, because I don't want you thinking any one of these perspectives is the only perspective. So we like to offer on the major stories, like here's a couple slices so you can see into that perspective. And without further ado, let's go see who voted for genocide in our name with our tax dollars without our approval. And let's examine this, because I think that's a problem.
The U.S. vetoed a UN resolution calling for a ceasefire. This is the fourth time that they blocked the ceasefire. We actually have video of U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, making a statement about this vote and what the plan is for the future of Israel-Palestine. And listen to her words.
Intend to do this the right way so that we can create the right conditions for a safer, more peaceful future. And we will continue to actively engage in the hard work of direct diplomacy on the ground until we reach a final solution.
A final solution? I mean, for people out there who don't know, that was literally the Nazi plan for Jews.
Kind of a big
Holocaust
deal.
was the final solution. You kind of can't make this up.
I myself am very careful. Like because the Jews suffered this horrible genocide, you know, and they're still traumatized by it, and they're carrying with that trauma with them to this day, including within my own family, right, my own grandparents. So I avoid making any comparisons to the Nazis like a hot plague, and I don't think people shouldn't do that. It's just I understand that there's so much trauma, so to use that phrase, I think is just, I mean, just somewhat out of touch, especially when it's the people of Gaza who are obviously the ones facing a genocide.